What if the most powerful weapon you could wield wasn't a sword, a strategy, or even words but silence? Not just the absence of noise, but the kind of deep, intentional stillness that shaped empires, outlasted wars, and built legacies that still influence us today. Think about it. In a world that never stops shouting, where distractions bombard us from every angle, the ability to turn inward, to cultivate what the Stoics called apatheia, that unshakable calm, might be the ultimate edge. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled Rome at its height, put it simply, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that's the paradox. Silence isn't passive. It's a discipline, a choice to master the chaos within so you can navigate the chaos outside. Now, imagine standing in the sandals of those ancient Stoics, facing down political intrigue, battlefield horrors, or personal betrayals, all while clinging to that inner quiet. How did they do it? And more importantly, how can we borrow that same unflinching clarity in a world that feels just as turbulent? This isn't just history, it's a survival manual for modern life. Because the silence they practiced wasn't about avoiding conflict, it was about seeing through it. It's how Seneca wrote letters of wisdom while exiled on a barren island, how Epictetus taught freedom despite being born a slave, and why Stoic principles still fuel CEOs, athletes, and leaders today. They understood something we've forgotten. Noise drowns judgment, but silence sharpens it. So let's unravel this thread together. From the hushed halls of ancient Athens to the boardrooms and battlefields where Stoic silence still gives people an almost unfair advantage. We'll explore how restraint became a superpower, why presence beats panic every time, and how you can train your mind to find that same unshakable calm in the storm. Because here's the truth, empires rise and fall, technologies evolve, but the human mind hasn't changed. The same stillness that guided Marcus Aurelius through war can guide you through your daily battles. Ready to discover how? Let's begin. When the Stoics spoke of silence, they weren't just talking about shutting out the world. They meant something far more radical, the stillness of a mind untroubled by chaos. Imagine standing in the middle of a roaring crowd, your thoughts crystal clear, untouched by the frenzy around you. That's apatheia, not indifference, but mastery. Seneca put it perfectly. We must give up many things to which we are addicted, considering them to be good. Otherwise, courage will vanish, which should continually test itself. In other words, silence isn't passive. It's the act of stripping away distractions to uncover what truly matters. Now, contrast that with today's world. Notifications buzz, screens flicker, and opinions flood in non-stop. Our modern noise isn't just auditory, it's a constant tug of war for our attention, fragmenting focus into a dozen directions. The Stoics faced different battles: political upheaval, war, exile, but their enemy was the same, the tyranny of uncontrolled reactions. Their silence was a shield. By training their minds to observe without immediately reacting, they could spot the gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap, choose wisely. Think of Marcus Aurelius ruling an empire on the brink of collapse, writing his meditations by candlelight, or Epictetus, who taught that freedom begins when we stop letting external chaos dictate our inner state. Their silence wasn't escape, it was strategy. It's why Stoicism survived where empires crumbled, because clarity outlasts noise. Today, that same discipline lets a surgeon steady their hands in the operating room, an athlete focus under pressure, or a leader make the call when others panic. The mechanism hasn't changed. Silence is the space where wisdom speaks loudest, So how do we reclaim it? Start small. The next time you feel the pull to check your phone, pause. Breathe. That tiny resistance is the first brick in rebuilding your inner citadel. Because here's the secret the Stoics knew. Silence isn't about muting the world. It's about turning up the volume on your own judgment. And in a society that equates loudness with power, that's the ultimate rebellion. Picture this: the year is 170, and the Roman Empire is stretched thin. Germanic tribes surge across the frozen Danube, plague ravages cities, and political schemers circle like vultures, yet every night, by flickering lamplight, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius picks up his pen. Not to draft battle plans or decrees, but to write reminders to himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. These words, scribbled in the quiet hours between battles, became meditations, a private journal never meant for publication, yet one of history's most enduring guides to resilience. Here's what's extraordinary. Marcus didn't write from a palace throne room. He wrote in military tents on horseback amid the chaos of war. That's the Stoic secret. Silence isn't the absence of turmoil. It's the ability to carve out clarity within it. His journals weren't escapism, they were mental training. By reflecting daily on virtue, mortality, and the nature of control, he fortified his mind against fear and indecision. When his generals panicked, he paused. When rumors spread, he weighed them calmly. Rome didn't just survive those years, it stabilized under a leader who refused to let outer storms dictate his inner weather. Take one piercing example. During the Marcomannic Wars, as tribes burned villages just miles from his camp, Marcus wrote, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing." No lofty philosophy, just raw acknowledgement that life will throw you, but then comes the pivot. Be ready for the sudden grip and stand firm. That's the journal's power. It wasn't about ignoring reality. It was about seeing it clearly enough to act wisely. Modern psychologists call this metacognition, the practice of observing your own thoughts. Marcus did it with ink and parchment, creating space between impulse and action. Now, here's where it gets practical. You don't need a war or an empire to use this tool. Try this tonight. Open a notebook or your phone's notes app and ask 2 questions Marcus might have. What tested me today? And where did I let noise cloud my judgment? No grand prose required. The goal isn't to write for posterity, but to interrupt autopilot. Like Marcus, you're not recording events, you're training focus. Because here's the truth he proved. Leaders aren't born unshakable. They're made in those quiet moments when they choose to face themselves before facing the world. So what's your battlefield? Maybe it's an inbox that never empties, a conflict at home, or the pressure to always perform. The scale doesn't matter. The habit does, because when you journal like a Stoic, you're not just writing, you're building an inner citadel, brick by brick, where no outside chaos can reach the core of who you are. And that's how silence outlasts empires. Epictetus, born a slave and crippled by his master's cruelty, might seem an unlikely teacher of inner freedom. Yet his words cut to the bone. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. For the Stoics, silence wasn't just about closing your mouth. It was about creating space between the world's chaos and your response. Imagine a shield, not of iron, but of awareness. When insults flew, when plans collapsed, when fear gripped the heart, that shield gave them one critical moment to ask, is this within my control? If not, they let it pass like clouds across the sky. If it was, they acted not impulsively, but with precision. Fast forward to today, your phone pings with a divisive headline. A coworker snaps at you in a meeting. The temptation to fire back, to obsess, to spiral is immediate. That's where Epictetus' Discipline of Assent comes in. Before an impression, a thought, an emotion, an external event takes hold, pause, label it. This is just noise, not to suppress it, but to see it clearly. Modern psychology calls this cognitive distancing, but the Stoics practiced it 2,000 years ago. They knew reactive emotions are like kindling. The quicker you feed them, the faster they blaze out of control. Silence, in this sense, is the water that keeps the fire from spreading. Try this tonight. The next time someone cuts you off in traffic or your inbox floods with demands, don't suppress the frustration. Observe it. Say to yourself, I'm feeling anger rise, as if you're watching a wave form and recede. That tiny gap, Epictetus, space between impression and assent, is where your power lies. It's how a CEO stays calm during a boardroom mutiny, or a parent diffuses a toddler's tantrum without mirroring the chaos. The mechanism is identical: silence as a buffer against the world's turbulence. Now here's the twist: the Stoics weren't advocating detachment from life. They were teaching selective engagement. When you master the pause, you're not avoiding action. You're reserving your energy for what truly deserves it. Think of Marcus Aurelius weighing battle strategies, or Seneca writing letters of solace amid Nero's tyranny. Their silence wasn't passive. It was strategic restraint, like an archer drawing a bow slowly to hit the mark. Today, that might mean scrolling past outrage bait to focus on a loved one's voice, or walking away from an online argument to preserve your peace. So here's your challenge. For the next 24 hours, treat every reactive impulse as an experiment. When the news agitates you, notice the physical tension before clicking. When criticism stings, count to 3 before defending. You're not building a wall against the world. You're installing a filter, one that lets wisdom through while keeping the chaos at bay. Because the ultimate irony: the quieter you become inside, the louder your clarity speaks when it truly matters. Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest and most influential men, did something that shocked his peers. He walked away. Not from power, but from the noise of power, voluntarily exiling himself to the quiet of Corsica for nearly a decade. At first glance, it seems like surrender. But read his letters and you'll uncover the truth. This was a masterstroke of strategic silence. We must take breaks from our labors, he wrote, not to end them, but to renew our strength for when we return. For Seneca, exile wasn't retreat, it was recalibration. While Rome buzzed with gossip and political games, he used solitude to sharpen his philosophy, writing works that would outlive the empire itself. Now, fast forward to today. We don't face exile, but we battle something just as relentless: the infinite scroll, notifications, news cycles, and the pressure to always be on create a different kind of chaos. That's why Silicon Valley CEOs and Navy SEAL alike now practice what Seneca modeled centuries ago: deliberate withdrawal. Digital detoxes, silent retreats, even the do not disturb mode on your phone are modern echoes of Stoic silence. The principle remains unchanged. Stepping back isn't weakness. It's how you create the space to see clearly. Think of an athlete tapering before a race, or a musician pausing between notes. What seems like emptiness is actually part of the rhythm. Seneca knew this intimately. During his exile, he didn't just brood. He studied, wrote, and observed human nature with razor clarity. When he finally returned to Rome, he wasn't just refreshed, he was realigned. His later writings reveal a mind that could navigate Nero's court precisely because it had first learned to navigate itself. Here's the challenge for us: where in your life could a strategic pause, even a tiny one, change everything? Maybe it's turning off your phone for an hour each evening to read, or taking a solo walk without headphones. The goal isn't to escape reality, but to meet it with fresh eyes, because the noise of the world will always demand your attention. The question is, will you let it dictate your focus, or will you follow Seneca's lead, stepping back not to flee the storm, but to learn how to sail through it? Consider this: every major religion and philosophy has some version of retreat, monks in cloisters, vision quests in nature, even the scientific sabbatical. Why? Because distance reveals what proximity obscures. A CEO who spends a week in silence often returns with the one insight that saves the company. A parent who steals 10 minutes of quiet before the school run handles the chaos with more patience. Seneca's exile proves it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop. Not forever, just long enough to remember who you are beneath the noise. So ask yourself, where are you overexposed? What situation or habit would benefit from a temporary withdrawal? It doesn't require a desert island, just the willingness to mute the world long enough to hear your own wisdom again. Because the paradox is this: the people who master silence don't disappear. They become the ones who, when they finally speak, change everything. Cato the Younger, the Stoic senator who stood unflinching against Julius Caesar's rise, had a peculiar habit in Rome's heated debates. He'd sit in silence long after others had spoken. While politicians clamored to be heard, Cato would wait, sometimes for hours, letting the frenzy exhaust itself before offering a single, measured sentence. His contemporaries mocked him for it. History proved them wrong, because Cato understood what modern neuroscience confirms: silence isn't just absence, it's the breeding ground for better decisions. In a world where leaders were judged by how loudly they could dominate a room, his restraint became legendary. Plutarch recounts how, during a critical vote, Cato's prolonged pause forced the assembly to reconsider their rash impulses, saving Rome from what would have been a disastrous law. Now compare that to today's decision-making landscape. We swipe left or right in seconds, fire off emails in anger, and make million-dollar deals between subway stops. Speed is celebrated, deliberation dismissed as hesitation. But here's what the Stoics knew: every knee-jerk reaction is a debt your future self will pay with interest. Seneca warned, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." He wasn't advocating procrastination. He was exposing the danger of confusing motion for progress. Take a modern example. A study from Columbia University found that judges rule more favorably after lunch when mental fatigue is lower. Their verdicts aren't just about facts, they're shaped by unseen noise, hunger, stress, the rush to clear dockets. Now imagine applying Cato's silence. What if, before signing a contract or sending that heated text, you imposed your own Stoic pause? Not days, just 60 seconds of stillness to ask, is this necessary? Is this true? Is this kind? That tiny buffer could mean the difference between a choice you defend and one you regret. This isn't about avoiding decisions, it's about owning them. Consider how Warren Buffett, a known admirer of Stoic philosophy, operates. He's famous for sitting on investment opportunities until they're unmistakably clear, while competitors chase every trend. Or Angela Merkel, nicknamed the Decelerator for her deliberate leadership style during crises. Both embody what Epictetus meant when he said, "No great thing is created suddenly." Speed might win races, but silence wins wars. So here's your challenge. Think of one decision from last week, big or small, where noise clouded your judgment. Maybe you interrupted instead of listening, bought something impulsively, or agreed to a commitment you didn't want. Now replay it with Cato's silence. How might 5 extra breaths have changed the outcome? Because that's the Stoic secret. The space between thought and action isn't empty. It's where your power lies. And in a world addicted to instant reactions, reclaiming that space isn't just wise, it's revolutionary. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, once told his students, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so we can listen twice as much as we speak." This wasn't just clever wordplay, it was a radical challenge to the power dynamics of his time. In ancient Rome, status was often measured by how much space your voice took up. Senators competed to out-orate each other, emperors demanded constant applause, and even philosophers lectured for hours. But the Stoics flipped the script. True wisdom, they argued, begins with the humility to listen. Not passively, but with full presence, the kind of silence that absorbs before it responds. Fast forward to modern boardrooms. A tech CEO inherits a failing company, divisions at war, morale in freefall. Instead of marching in with a bold vision speech, she does something shocking. She spends her first month silent, not absent, intensely present. She meets every team, from engineers to janitors, asking one question: what would make your work better? The answers aren't flattering. Complaints about mismanagement, wasted resources, toxic culture pour out. A traditional leader might have silenced the criticism, but her Stoic discipline held. She listened not to agree, but to understand. Within a year, that company's turnaround became a case study. Why? Because she grasped what Epictetus knew: you can't solve a problem you haven't truly heard. This principle transcends business. Think of the doctor who catches a life-changing diagnosis because they resist interrupting their patient's story. The teacher who spots a struggling student's potential by noticing what isn't said. Even in relationships, how many arguments escalate because we're preparing our rebuttal instead of hearing the hurt beneath the words? The Stoics called this prosauch, attentive awareness. It's why Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" before speaking. That pause between another's words and your response is where empathy is born. Neuroscience now confirms what these philosophers practiced. Studies show leaders who prioritize listening foster teams with higher creativity, loyalty, and problem solving. Why? Because silence isn't empty, it's a signal. When you stop projecting your own noise, you create space for others to reveal their best thinking, like a gardener who stops trampling the soil long enough for seeds to sprout. Here's the twist: Stoic listening isn't about being quiet to seem wise. It's strategic. Epictetus trained his students to listen for the gaps between what people claim to value and how they actually live, between their fears and their potential. That's how you lead effectively, by hearing not just words but patterns. A startup founder who listens to customer complaints might spot the unspoken need that defines their next product. A parent who listens beyond their child's tantrum might uncover a hidden stress at school. Try this today. In your next conversation, resist the urge to relate, advise, or fill the silence. Just absorb. Notice how often your mind jumps to respond before the other person finishes. That's the noise Epictetus warned about, the static that drowns wisdom. Because here's the truth the Stoics proved: the most powerful voice often belongs to whoever mastered the art of hearing first. Socrates, surrounded by his grieving students in that Athenian prison cell, did the unthinkable. He thanked his executioner. Poisoned for corrupting the youth with questions, his final act wasn't defiance or despair, but serene acceptance. "The hour of departure has arrived," he said, raising the hemlock cup, "and we go our ways, I to die and you to live." Which is better, only God knows. No grand speeches, no pleas for mercy, just quiet courage that echoed through millennia. This wasn't resignation. It was the ultimate demonstration of Stoic apatheia, the unshakable inner stillness that treats even death as neither good nor bad, but simply as a fact to be met with clear eyes. What's staggering isn't just Socrates' composure, but what happened next. His student Plato, witnessing that silence, devoted his life to preserving it, writing dialogues that would shape Western thought. Another disciple, Xenophon, became a legendary general who credited Socrates' lessons for his battlefield poise. That's the paradox of unspoken resilience. The quieter the endurance, the louder the legacy. Because when you refuse to let suffering dictate your character, you don't just survive, you blueprint a strength others will study centuries later. Now fast forward to modern battles. Maybe it's not hemlock but a layoff notice, not a death sentence but a diagnosis, not political persecution but a social media storm. The scale changes, the human challenge doesn't. Consider Nelson Mandela's 27 years in prison, where he secretly studied Stoicism and later said, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the triumph over it." Or Malala Yousafzai, who after being shot by the Taliban chose focused activism over outrage. Their power didn't come from ignoring pain, it came from metabolizing it into something beyond reaction. Marcus Aurelius scribbled in his wartime journal a line that could fit on any therapist's wall today. "The obstacle is the way, not avoid the obstacle or curse the obstacle, but recognize it as the very path to growth." Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth. The Stoics called it basic hygiene for the mind. When a startup founder's first venture collapses, when an athlete blows their championship moment, when a parent faces a child's illness, the choice isn't between suffering and joy, but between suffering that drains and suffering that transforms. Here's where it gets practical. Think of a setback you're facing right now, a rejection, a failure, an injustice. Now, imagine applying the Socratic pause. Before venting, before spiraling, ask, what part of this can I actually control? Not the event itself, but your narrative about it. Not others' actions, but your preparation. The poet Rilke captured this Stoic shift perfectly. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, just keep going, no feeling is final. Try this reframe next time you hit a wall, instead of asking, why me? Ask, what now? That tiny linguistic pivot channels ancient wisdom. It's how a firefighter stays calm in burning rubble, how a nurse maintains compassion after a brutal shift, how you might face tomorrow's unexpected blow. Because here's the secret Socrates proved, the world will always hand you hemlock in some form. The question is, will you drink it as a victim, or raise the cup as someone who's already free? Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who shaped Epictetus, had a radical teaching method. He spoke less, not more. While other philosophers dazzled crowds with elaborate speeches, Rufus believed true wisdom couldn't be shouted. It had to be uncovered through disciplined silence. His students didn't leave with notebooks crammed with maxims. They left with one or two burning questions that haunted them for weeks. Imagine a martial arts master who teaches not by endless drills, but by letting you feel the weight of a single, perfectly balanced sword. That's Stoic mentorship, stripping away noise until only the essential remains. Now, contrast that with today's fire hose of advice, self-help books bloated with platitudes, motivational speakers peddling 7-step formulas, endless podcasts promising shortcuts to success. The Stoics would have recoiled, not because the insights were wrong, but because overload numbs the mind. Rufus knew something modern neuroscience confirms: the fewer the words, the deeper the imprint. Think of the coach who changed your game with 3 whispered adjustments, or the grandparent whose rare but piercing comments still guide you decades later. Wisdom isn't measured in word count, it's measured in resonance. This principle thrives in unexpected places today. Elite military units like the Navy SEAL train recruits with brutal simplicity. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. No lectures on resilience, just a mantra that forces self-reliance. Tech visionaries like Steve Jobs obsessed over distilling ideas to their essence, once spending hours debating a single slide's wording. Even modern therapy modalities like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, echo Rufus' approach. teaching clients to observe thoughts without getting tangled in them. The common thread: mastery begins when we stop adding and start subtracting. So who was your Musonius Rufus? Maybe it was the high school teacher who silenced your excuses with a raised eyebrow instead of a sermon. The boss who handed you a crisis with just 2 words, "Handle this," or even a stranger whose offhand remark cracked open a truth you'd avoided for years. These are the modern Stoic mentors, people who understand that real growth happens in the quiet after the words fade, when you're left alone with the weight of an idea you can't unsee. Here's the challenge: next time you seek guidance, resist the urge to drown in content. Instead, look for the mentor who speaks sparingly but precisely, the one whose silence feels heavier than others' speeches. Because as Rufus proved, the right words don't fill space. They created clearing room for you to find your own voice in the stillness. Before the sun cracked over Rome's 7 hills, Marcus Aurelius was already at work, not on empire but on himself. His morning ritual wasn't about checking scrolls or hearing petitions. It was silence, not the passive kind, but an active excavation of the mind. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. That's the Stoic dawn, a sacred space between sleeping and waking where you reclaim your agency before the world claims your attention. Modern science now confirms what these philosophers knew instinctively. Harvard researchers found that just 15 minutes of morning silence lowers cortisol levels sharper than caffeine raises them. Navy SEAL call it the 4-count breath, a tactical pause before chaos. But the Stoics went deeper. Their morning practice wasn't just stress relief, it was mental architecture. Picture this: Seneca would begin each day by rehearsing potential disasters, not to dwell on them, but to disarm their shock value. By envisioning setbacks beforehand, he turned anxiety into preparation. Epictetus took it further, advising students to greet sunrise with a question: what part of myself will I surrender to today? Not what will I achieve, but what will I protect? Here's where it gets practical. You don't need a marble terrace or hours of meditation to steal this strategy. Try the Stoic triage. First light, grab a notebook or your phone's notes app and answer 3 questions Marcus might have asked. 1. What's one thing within my control today? Your focus, your effort, your attitude. 2. What's one external challenge I'll likely face? A difficult coworker, a delayed train, a tempting distraction. 3. How will my best self respond to that challenge? Not how you want to react, but how your wisest version would. This isn't positive thinking, it's precision thinking. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, you're hardening your resolve before the heat hits. A study in the Journal of Applied Psychology found that people who journaled like this for 5 mornings made better decisions under pressure. Their brains literally treated obstacles as puzzles rather than threats. But here's the twist: the Stoics didn't just write and forget. They carried their morning clarity like a compass. When Marcus faced betrayal, he'd recall his pre-dawn resolve. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. When a client yelled at Seneca, he'd hear his own morning reminder: they're not doing this to me, they're doing this for me to test my philosophy. That's the ritual's real power. It doesn't just prepare you for the day, it rewires how you experience it. So tomorrow, before you check email or social media, steal 10 minutes of what the ancients called philosophic daylight. No apps, no mantras, just you, a question, and the quiet certainty that no matter what the day hurls at you, you've already anchored your mind, because mornings aren't just for starting fresh. They're for remembering who you are before the world tells you who to be. There's a dangerous myth about Stoic silence that it means bottling up emotions or shrugging off injustice with cold detachment. Nothing could be further from the truth when Seneca advised, "Be silent in one way to the many, in another to the few." He wasn't endorsing indifference. He was mapping a strategy for conserving your most precious resource, attention. Think of it like oxygen on a plane. You secure your own mask first, not because you don't care about others, but because passing out helps no one. Consider Seneca's own life. As Nero's tutor, he navigated a court where every whisper could mean exile or death. His silence wasn't cowardice, it was curation. He wrote fiercely about poverty and corruption, yet chose his battles with surgical precision. In one letter, he describes ignoring petty insults as stepping over puddles rather than stirring them into storms. That's the key. Stoics weren't passive observers of life. They were master editors, cutting distractions to highlight what deserved their full voice. Modern psychology backs this ancient insight. Studies on decision fatigue show that even trivial choices like arguing online or reacting to minor slights drain the mental energy needed for real challenges. A CEO who wastes focus defending ego in meetings has less left for strategic pivots. A parent who engages every tantrum exhausts the patience needed for deeper teaching moments. The Stoic distinction is simple. Silence isn't about not caring, it's about caring so much for what truly matters that you refuse to dilute your fire. Take an example from today's digital battlegrounds. Scroll through any social media feed and you'll find outrage bait, hot takes designed to provoke instant reactions. The Stoic response, not blind scrolling, but what psychologist Viktor Frankl called the space between stimulus and response. Before typing that angry reply, ask Seneca's filter question: will this exchange improve anything? If not, silence isn't surrender, it's reclaiming sovereignty over your time and peace. This principle shines in history's greatest leaders. Mandela spent years quietly studying his jailer's language and habits, not to excuse oppression, but to later negotiate its end with unshakable leverage. Astronaut Chris Hadfield trained to stay silent during simulator emergencies until he'd verified the true threat, a habit that saved crews from panic-induced errors. Their restraint wasn't weakness, it was the pause before precision. Here's how to practice this today. The next time someone provokes you a rude comment, an unfair demand, imagine Seneca at your shoulder whispering, "Is this the hill?" Not every hill is worth dying on, but some are worth planting flags. The difference, wise engagement leaves you energized, not emptied, because true Stoic silence isn't a wall, it's a gate, letting through only what deserves to meet your full voice. Epictetus threw a challenge at his students that still cuts deep today. You are disturbed not by things, but by the view you take of them. Think about the last time traffic made you furious, or a coworker's comment left you simmering. The Stoic twist: the honking car didn't create your anger, your belief that traffic shouldn't exist did. The remark didn't wound you, your story about what it meant did. This is the silence of self-ownership, the radical act of noticing the gap between what happens and the noise we add to it. Take a modern example. 2 employees get passed over for promotion. One spirals into resentment, convinced the boss has it out for them. The other audits their performance, identifies gaps, and creates a plan. Same event, wildly different outcomes. Why? The first mistook their mental chatter for reality. The second used silence to separate fact from fiction. Epictetus would call this the discipline of assent. The moment we choose whether to sign off on our initial interpretations or question them. Here's where it gets practical. Try this tonight. Replay a situation that bothered you today, a delayed flight, a cancelled plan, a critical email. Now mute your mental commentary like turning down a radio. Strip away the judgments, "This is unfair," predictions, "It'll keep happening," and labels, "They're so irresponsible." What's left? Just the raw event, a flight number on a screen, words in an inbox. That empty space is your power center, because when you stop conflating what happened with what you think about it, you reclaim agency. Neuroscience backs this ancient hack. Studies on cognitive diffusion show that labeling emotions, "I'm noticing anger," rather than fusing with them, "I am angry," reduces their intensity. It's why Navy SEAL train to narrate their stress, "My heart is pounding," during hellish drills, creating just enough silence between stimulus and response to stay mission-focused. But here's the catch: self-ownership isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about refusing to let them autopilot your life. Imagine your mind as a courtroom. Every upsetting event gets two witnesses: your reactive self, the prosecution, and your observing self, the judge. Most of us let the prosecution rant unchecked. Stoic silence is the gavel strike that demands evidence. Is this thought true? Is it helpful? Does it serve who I want to be? Watch for this pattern tomorrow. When your kid spills juice or your project hits a snag, notice the instant story your mind creates. That pause, where you question whether the spill means they're careless or just being five, whether the snag proves you're failing or just learning, is where freedom lies. Because the quieter you become inside, the louder your choices speak. And that's how silence builds empires, starting with the one between your ears. When grief arrives, as it inevitably does, the modern world gives us two terrible options: either plaster it across social media in performative displays or bury it deep where no one sees. The Stoics offered a third path: mourning with silent dignity. Seneca, who lost his only son, wrote, "Nature gives us some virtues at birth, others must be forged in the fire." Grief to the Stoics was that fire not to be avoided, but to be endured with a quiet strength that honors both the loss and the living. Consider how Marcus Aurelius mourned his adoptive father. Rather than public spectacles of weeping, he retreated inward, writing, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs?" This wasn't repression, it was reverence, the understanding that loud lamentation often says more about the mourner than the departed. Today, we've lost this distinction. Scrolling through condolences online, you'll find eulogies crafted for likes, grief staged for algorithms. The Stoics would ask, who are you mourning for, the lost or the audience? Here's the radical reframe: silence in grief isn't about hiding pain. It's about protecting its sanctity. When Epictetus advised, "Don't let your tears drown the memory of what was good," he wasn't advocating stoicism in the lowercase sense, that robotic suppression of feeling. He was warning against letting sorrow become self-indulgence. Modern psychology echoes this. Studies show that those who process grief privately, through journaling or quiet reflection, recover resilience faster than those who broadcast it publicly. Because performative grief demands energy that could be spent healing. Try this practice next time loss strikes. Borrow the ancient Roman ritual of imagines. Families would keep masks of ancestors, not to dwell on death, but to recall their wisdom in silence. Create your own version. Light a candle and speak to your loved one as if they're present, not on a social media post, but in the space between breaths. Notice how different it feels to mourn without spectators, without the pressure to curate your pain. There's a reason Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything is ephemeral, both memory and the remembered." Not to diminish loss, but to clarify love. The quieter your grief, the louder the truth beneath it. What we truly mourn isn't just the person, but the part of ourselves they helped exist. And that's a conversation too sacred for timelines and comment sections. It belongs to the silence where real healing begins. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who shaped Epictetus, had zero tolerance for whining. When a student groaned about his cheap cloak in winter, Rufus didn't offer sympathy. He pointed to fishermen in thin shirts hauling nets through icy waves. They don't freeze because they're focused on doing, not complaining, he snapped. This wasn't cruelty, it was surgery on the soul. The Stoics saw complaint as a leak in your mental armor, not just useless but actively corrosive. Every whine reinforces helplessness. Every silent action rebuilds agency. Fast forward to today's culture of venting. Social media rewards grievances with likes and algorithms amplify outrage. But here's what Rufus understood. Complaining is like drinking salt water. The more you indulge, the thirstier you become. Neuroscience confirms this. A Yale study found that vocalizing frustrations without seeking solutions activates the brain's stress pathways, trapping you in a loop where misery breeds more misery. Contrast that with Stoic silence, the kind a nurse uses during a double shift, not by denying exhaustion, but by funneling that energy into the next patient's care. The ancient remedy was simple yet brutal: substitution. When a Roman soldier griped about his rations, his centurion wouldn't lecture. He'd assign extra drills until exhaustion left no room for grumbling. Modern equivalents exist. A startup founder I know banned complaint sessions in his team meetings. Instead, anyone voicing a problem had to propose one actionable fix. Within months, productivity spiked not because issues vanished, but because energy shifted from amplifying problems to solving them. Try this experiment for the next 7 days. Carry a small notebook. Each time you feel a complaint rising about traffic, your boss, the weather, write it down, then immediately jot one micro action to address it. No parking. Research a new route, workload overwhelming, block 30 minutes to prioritize. The magic isn't in the solution size, it's in the mental pivot from victim to architect. Like Rufus' student who stopped shivering when he stopped obsessing over his cloak, you'll find most discomforts shrink when deprived of your attention. History's most resilient people share this trait. Shackleton's stranded crew survived Antarctic winters by banning despair talk. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz by focusing not on his suffering, but on helping others bear theirs. Their silence wasn't denial, it was defiance. As Epictetus put it, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. So here's the challenge. Let your next frustration be the spark that lights action, not the log that feeds the fire. Because the world has enough critics, what it needs are builders, and builders don't whine, they work. George Washington's contemporaries often remarked on his unusual habit. He spoke less in meetings than anyone else. While other founding fathers debated passionately, Washington would sit in silence, listening intently, only to deliver a few decisive words that carried the weight of the room. This wasn't shyness, it was strategy. Historians trace this discipline to his early exposure to Stoic philosophy through books like Rules of Civility, which emphasized restraint over bluster. In an era of fiery revolutionaries, Washington's quiet authority became his superpower. He understood what modern leaders often forget. Influence isn't measured by airtime, but by the gravity of your words when you choose to break the silence. Now, flash forward to today's leadership landscape. Social media rewards hot takes delivered in seconds. Politicians compete to dominate news cycles with sound bites rather than solutions. A Stanford study analyzed executive communications and found a startling trend. The average CEO now speaks 40% more words per meeting than their counterparts did 20 years ago. Yet employee trust in leadership has plummeted. Why? Because noise erodes credibility. When every thought is broadcast unfiltered, nothing carries weight. The Stoics would diagnose this as a crisis of proherses, the ability to distinguish between what deserves your voice and what doesn't. Consider the contrast. Washington's farewell address, crafted over months with Madison and Hamilton, shaped American foreign policy for over a century. Its power came from its rarity. He stepped away from power precisely to give his words permanence. Compare that to a modern politician tweeting 30 times a day. The lesson isn't that leaders should vanish, but that silence creates space for substance. Like a sculptor removing marble to reveal form, restraint reveals intent. This principle thrives in unexpected places today. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, he inherited a culture of know-it-all bravado, his first move. Mandating listening tours where executives had to spend weeks hearing employees without defending or debating. The result, a cultural reset that tripled the company's market value. Or take Jacinda Ardern's response to New Zealand's mosque shootings. Her measured silence at memorials spoke louder than any speech could. These leaders grasped the Stoic truth. Sometimes the most powerful statement is the one you don't make. Here's where it gets personal. Think of your own sphere, whether you lead a team, a classroom, or a family. How often do you speak just to fill space? To assert authority, to soothe discomfort, try Washington's experiment. For one meeting, one dinner conversation, commit to speaking only when your silence would be a disservice. Notice how it changes the rhythm. When you stop competing for airtime, people start listening for your voice, because true leadership isn't about having the floor, it's about knowing when the floor needs you. The test comes when chaos hits. In 2017, when a United Airlines passenger was violently dragged off a plane, the CEO's immediate public reaction was defensive, sparking global outrage. Contrast that with Southwest Airlines' response to an engine failure. Their CEO stayed silent for 48 hours while facts were gathered, then delivered a concise statement taking full responsibility. The difference: one added fuel to the fire, the other contained it. Stoicism calls this premeditatio malorum, anticipating crises to respond rather than react. So here's the challenge. Next time you're tempted to weigh in on every debate or fill every pause, ask Washington's question: will this silence serve better? Not as avoidance, but as preparation. The way a bow drawn back makes the arrow fly truer. Because in a world drowning in words, the rarest commodity isn't more speech. It's the wisdom to know when to hold it. The Roman general Scipio Africanus, hours before facing Hannibal's war elephants at Zama, did something unexpected. He sat alone in his tent, eyes closed, running the battle through his mind. Not picturing victory, but visualizing every possible disaster. Elephants breaking his lines, cavalry getting trapped, messengers misreading signals. This wasn't pessimism, it was premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of silent preparation that turns fear into foresight. By the time the trumpet sounded, he'd already weathered the worst in his mind, leaving nothing to panic. Modern neuroscience now validates this ancient hack. Studies on elite athletes show those who mentally rehearse failures, not just successes, perform better under pressure. A gymnast who visualizes slipping off the beam recovers faster when it happens. A surgeon who imagines complications before entering or adapts more calmly when blood loss spikes. The mechanism is simple. Silent rehearsal rewires your brain to recognize challenges as familiar terrain rather than existential threats. Take entrepreneur Sarah Blakely, who credits her billion-dollar Spanx empire to a childhood ritual. Every night at dinner, her father would ask, "What did you fail at today?" Not to shame her, but to normalize struggle as part of growth. That early training in premeditatio shaped her resilience. When manufacturers laughed at her prototype, she'd already weathered rejection in her mind. Or consider Kobe Bryant's infamous pre-dawn shadow workouts, where he'd practice moves blindfolded, anticipating defenders who weren't there. His silence wasn't empty, it was a training ground for chaos. Here's how to steal this today. Pick one challenge you're avoiding, a difficult conversation, a career leap, a fitness goal. Now, in stillness, walk through the worst-case scenario in detail. Not to dwell on it, but to defang it. Imagine your startup failing. What's your first recovery step? Picture freezing during the presentation. How will you reset? Like Scipio, you're not summoning demons, you're mapping escape routes. The magic lies in the physicality of this practice. Navy SEAL don't just think about drowning, they train in dunk tanks, experiencing controlled panic until their bodies learn this sensation won't kill you. When you mentally rehearse losing a client or bombing an interview, you're doing the same, teaching your nervous system that survival isn't about avoiding storms, but remembering you've weathered them before. So tonight, before sleep, try this stoic triage. Name one fear you've been sidestepping. Then, in the quiet, let it play out like a film, your hands shaking during the pitch, the awkward silence after asking for a raise. Notice where your mind wants to look away. That's exactly where your preparation should linger, because the unexamined fear controls you. The one you've met in silence becomes just another problem to solve. And that shift from dread to strategy is where ordinary people forge extraordinary resilience. The Stoics knew this truth. Fortune favors the prepared mind. Not because it avoids suffering, but because it's already whispered, if this, then that. And in that whisper lies an unshakable advantage, the kind that wins battles, builds empires, and turns stumbling blocks into stepping stones. Socrates, the original gadfly of Athens, built his entire philosophy on one radical admission: I know that I know nothing. This wasn't false modesty, it was intellectual armor. By openly acknowledging ignorance, he created space for true learning. The Stoics embraced this same humility, recognizing that the loudest minds are often the emptiest. Epictetus put it bluntly: it is impossible to learn what you think you already know. Imagine the power of approaching every conversation, every challenge with that silent openness, not as a blank slate, but as a disciplined mind aware of its blind spots. Fast forward to today's knowledge economy, where expertise is often measured by how confidently someone speaks rather than how carefully they listen. Contrast that with Nobel laureate Richard Feynman's famous notebook titled Things I Don't Know, or Warren Buffett's decades-long partnership with Charlie Munger, who credits their success to knowing the edge of our competence and staying miles away from it. These modern Stoics understand what ancient philosophers practiced. Wisdom begins when we stop pretending to have all the answers. Consider how this plays out in high-stakes environments. A Johns Hopkins study analyzed medical errors and found a startling pattern. The most experienced doctors made fewer mistakes not because they knew more, but because they asked more questions. One surgeon described it as listening to the silence between diagnoses, the pause where uncertainty whispers before ego shouts. That's Stoic humility in action, the courage to say, I'm not sure, when lives are on the line. The tech world offers another angle. Silicon Valley's most successful product designers don't start with solutions, they begin with what Amazon calls empty chair meetings, where an unoccupied seat represents the customer's voice. It's a physical reminder to shut up and listen before building. Twitter's former CEO Dick Costolo once told his team, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. A direct echo of Seneca's warning that no mind can remain sharp without being challenged. Here's the practical pivot. Next time you're tempted to dominate a conversation or dismiss feedback, try the Socratic pause. Ask yourself, what might I be missing here? Not as self-doubt, but as intellectual curiosity. The best teachers pepper lectures with, I don't know, let's explore. The wisest leaders create cultures where saying, I was wrong, earns more respect than pretending infallibility. Even in parenting, when a child asks why the sky is blue, answering, "Let's find out together," teaches more than any canned explanation. This humility isn't about diminishing your knowledge, it's about expanding it. Like a farmer leaving fields fallow so they can bear richer harvests, intellectual silence creates space for growth. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in the dead of night, "You can commit injustice by doing too much just as surely as by doing too little." Sometimes the bravest words are the ones we don't say, the silence that lets wisdom in. Traffic jams have a way of revealing who we really are. That moment when another car cuts you off, your grip tightens on the wheel, your jaw clenches, maybe even a curse escapes your lips. But here's the Stoic twist: the traffic didn't create your anger. The real culprit is the silent story you're telling yourself, that this shouldn't be happening, that the driver meant disrespect, that the universe owes you an open road. Epictetus, who endured slavery and physical disability, offered a razor-sharp tool for these moments: the dichotomy of control. "Some things are within our power," he said, "while others are not." Your reaction, yours, the traffic, not so much. This isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about redirecting energy. Picture a Roman general watching his supply wagons burn. He could rant about the injustice, or he could assess what's left and march forward. Modern life gives us endless versions of those burning wagons: flight delays, rude comments, spilled coffee. The Stoic move: sort them instantly into two mental boxes. Can I fix this? Or can I only fix my response? The first box gets your effort, the second gets your silence. Take a cue from the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. The cracks aren't hidden, they're highlighted. Apply that to traffic. Instead of fuming, use the delay to listen to an audiobook, call a friend, or practice deep breathing. The irritation doesn't vanish, it's just gilded with purpose. A study in applied psychology found commuters who reframed delays as me time reported lower stress and higher productivity. That's Stoic silence in action, not denying reality, but reshaping its meaning. Now try this experiment for one day. Tally every complaint, whether spoken aloud or muttered internally, about things you can't control: weather, politics, other people's choices. Then for each, ask Epictetus' question: does voicing this improve anything? You'll notice most don't pass the test. Like a gardener pruning dead branches, you're not stifling growth, you're directing it toward what actually bears fruit. The magic lies in what fills the space when pointless noise fades. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not in a palace, but amid war and betrayal. His journal wasn't a record of events he couldn't change. It was a workshop for refining what he could, his own character. That's the trade-off no one tells you about. Every time you stop vocalizing the uncontrollable, you free up bandwidth to strengthen the one thing always within your power, who you choose to be in response. So next time life hands you a traffic jam, literal or metaphorical, resist the knee-jerk rant. Instead, let the silence speak, not as resignation, but as liberation. Because the quieter you become about what doesn't matter, the louder you'll sound where it does. Marcus Aurelius faced daily betrayals from senators who schemed behind his back, yet his journal reveals no tirades against them, just a simple line: the best revenge is to not be like your enemy. Picture the Roman Senate, a viper's nest of gossip and power plays, where most leaders retaliated with equal venom. Marcus chose a different weapon: strategic silence. Not weakness, but a refusal to let others dictate his character. Fast forward to your last workplace spat or family feud. That co-worker who takes credit for your ideas, the relative who needles you at holidays. What if the most powerful move wasn't counterattacking, but simply declining to play? Modern psychology confirms this ancient hack. A Harvard study tracked workplace conflicts and found that when one party suddenly stops engaging in tit-for-tat sniping, hostility decreases by nearly 70% within weeks. It's not about swallowing your pride, it's about starving the conflict of oxygen. Think of a firefighter refusing to fan flames. When you don't mirror someone's pettiness, you force them to confront their own behavior without the excuse of they started it. Take a real-world example from a tech CEO who transformed her toxic workplace. Instead of publicly shaming the department head who undermined her, she began responding to his barbed emails with just 2 words, noted. Thanks, no defensiveness, no counter jabs. Within months, his behavior shifted not because she changed him, but because she stopped being his adversary. Silence had removed the payoff he got from provoking her. Now apply this to family dynamics. That uncle who always baits you into political arguments. The Stoic move isn't to out-debate him, it's to smile and say, you might be right, then change the subject. Watch how disorienting that is. Without resistance, his words hang in the air, exposing their own emptiness. As Epictetus observed, if someone speaks badly of you and it's true, correct yourself. If it's false, laugh. Here's the twist, this isn't passive aggression. True Stoic silence requires inner work first. Before you can disengage externally, you must interrogate why the conflict hooks you. Is it bruised ego? Fear of being disrespected. Marcus would advise writing down what stings you most about the situation, then asking, can I control this person's actions? If not, your energy belongs elsewhere, not in changing them, but in guarding your own peace. Try this challenge today. Identify one simmering tension in your life, a neighbor's passive-aggressive notes, a friend who always one-ups your struggles. Next interaction, deploy what Navy SEAL call tactical silence, not ignoring them, but responding with measured neutrality. I hear you, with steady eye contact. Let me think about that, instead of firing back. Like a judo master using an opponent's momentum against them, you're redirecting the energy they hoped to provoke. The ancient Stoics survived exile, war, and betrayal not by overpowering enemies, but by mastering their own reactions. Your modern battles might involve fewer daggers and more group chats, but the principle remains. When you refuse to let others' noise become your inner chaos, you reclaim something far more valuable than winning an argument, your sovereignty. And in that quiet space between their provocation and your non-reaction, you'll discover an unexpected superpower, the freedom to choose who you become. In an age where the average office worker switches tasks every 3 minutes, the Stoic practice of deep focus seems almost revolutionary. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not in between meetings and notifications, but in stolen hours of complete absorption, often by candlelight after the chaos of ruling an empire had quieted. What he understood, and what modern thinkers like Cal Newport now champion, is this: silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the precondition for work that matters. Newport's concept of deep work mirrors the Stoic discipline of attention, that rare ability to immerse so fully in a task that the world falls away, leaving only the clarity of purpose. Consider the Roman architect Vitruvius, who designed aqueducts that still stand today. His blueprints weren't drafted in frantic bursts between interruptions, but in prolonged states of flow where time dissolved. Contrast that with today's productivity theater, where we mistake busyness for progress, answering emails during calls, juggling tabs like circus performers, all while congratulating ourselves on multitasking. Neuroscience confirms the cost. Task switching burns glucose at twice the rate of focused work, leaving you exhausted but accomplishing little. The Stoics would diagnose this as a crisis of proherses, surrendering your most precious resource, attention, to whatever shouts loudest. Here's where Newport's rules collide with ancient wisdom. His suggestion to schedule silence isn't about working harder, it's about working like a Stoic. Start small, Block 90 morning minutes where your device is face down like Marcus scrolls at dusk. Treat this time as sacred, not just for writing or coding, but for any labor requiring depth. A chef perfecting a sauce, a teacher crafting a lesson, a parent fully present at bedtime, these are all acts of resistance against a culture that equates visibility with value. As Seneca warned, to be everywhere is to be nowhere. The proof lies in unexpected places. A study of violinists at Berlin's elite music academy found the best performers practiced less than their peers, but with absolute focus in shorter bursts. Similarly, when novelist Jonathan Franzen wrote The Corrections, he physically removed his laptop's internet card to eliminate distractions. These aren't hacks, they're modern ascesis Stoic training for the mind. Like Epictetus chaining himself to a statue to practice enduring discomfort, they create artificial constraints to cultivate real freedom. Try this experiment tomorrow. Identify one task that deserves your undivided attention, maybe a proposal, a creative project, or even a difficult conversation. Now engineer silence around it. Turn off notifications, leave your phone in another room, or borrow a trick from Roman scholars. Light a candle and work until it burns out. You'll discover what the Stoics knew, that depth isn't about time, but intensity. As Newport puts it, the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at exactly the same time it's becoming increasingly valuable. The irony, those aqueducts Vitruvius designed still function because they were built to last, not to impress. Your work operates on the same principle. Every silent hour invested in depth today becomes a pillar that holds up your legacy tomorrow. So let the world chase shallow victories. Your advantage lies in the quiet places where real mastery grows untouched by the frenzy, unconcerned with applause. Marcus Aurelius never intended for his private journals to be read. They were scribbled in the dead of night, by candlelight, with no audience but himself. Yet 2,000 years later, those quiet pages guide Navy SEAL through hell weeks and CEOs through boardroom battles. Meanwhile, the viral speeches of his contemporaries, the politicians who shouted over each other in Rome's forums, are dust. There's a lesson here that defies our modern obsession with visibility. Legacy isn't built in the spotlight. It's forged in the silent spaces between intention and action. The Stoics didn't write for retweets or algorithm spikes. They wrote to steal their own souls, and paradoxically, that's exactly why their words endure. Look at today's content landscape. A trending TikTok soundbite vanishes in weeks. A hot take on X dissolves by sundown. But Seneca's letters, they've survived barbarian invasions, the fall of empires, the birth of new worlds. Not because they were designed to grab attention, but because they were crafted to withstand time. The difference is depth versus distraction. Viral content is like fireworks, bright, loud, and instantly forgotten. Stoic silence is like oak roots growing unseen until they're unshakable. Consider the Japanese concept of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The mended cracks aren't hidden, they're honored. That's the power of work done in silence. Beethoven composed his Ninth Symphony while completely deaf, unable to hear applause. Emily Dickinson wrote nearly 2,000 poems seen by no one but her drawer. Their creations weren't shaped by the noise of approval. They were refined in the quiet crucible of obsession. Fast forward to now, the average Instagram post takes minutes to make and seconds to consume, which will still matter in a century. Here's the uncomfortable truth: we've confused visibility with value. A study in the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that people who document their goals publicly are less likely to achieve them. The act of broadcasting tricks the brain into feeling it's already done the work. The Stoics would nod knowingly. Epictetus warned, "Don't tell people your plans, show them results." Modern creators might monetize their journey, but history only remembers destinations. So here's the challenge. What silent work are you neglecting for the dopamine hit of instant validation? Maybe it's the novel you keep delaying to post hot takes, the skill you won't practice until it's camera ready, the relationship you document more than you nurture. Try this experiment for 1 month. Take your most important project underground. No progress posts, no humble brags, just you and the work. Notice how the absence of applause changes your focus. Like a tree growing in a hidden grove, your roots will dig deeper when no one's watching. Because legacy obeys a strange law, the less you perform your depth, the more it accumulates. The letters Lincoln wrote to himself during the Civil War outlasted every stump speech. Van Gogh's private sketches became priceless after his death. Your silent work, the journal, the prototype, the patient mentoring, might feel invisible now, but remember, Marcus' meditations were just a dead emperor's notebook until someone realized they held the blueprint for resilience. What quiet pages are you filling that tomorrow's world might desperately need? The billionaire hedge fund manager Ray Dalio has a nightly ritual that never makes headlines. For over 40 years, he's handwritten 3 things he's grateful for in a battered notebook. No social media posts, no humble brags to colleagues, just ink on paper that no one else sees. This is Stoic gratitude in its purest form, appreciation divorced from performance, thankfulness that demands no witnesses. While the modern world turns gratitude into shareable content, #blessed captions, forced holiday social media challenges, the ancients practiced it as private architecture for the soul. Seneca called gratitude the memory of the heart, something too sacred to outsource to likes and comments. Imagine 2 people keeping gratitude journals. One posts daily thank you notes on Instagram, carefully curating their optimism for maximum engagement. The other scribbles in a leather-bound book before bed, never mentioning it to anyone. Neuroscience reveals an uncomfortable truth. The public performer's brain starts associating gratitude with external validation, while the private practitioner rewires their neural pathways toward intrinsic joy. A Harvard study tracked both types and found the silent group reported deeper, more sustained life satisfaction over time. Why? Because real gratitude isn't a performance, it's a reckoning. When no one's watching, you can't fake it. The Stoics took this further. Marcus Aurelius didn't just list comforts, he thanked challenges. The obstacle becomes the way. His journal includes gratitude for difficult people who tested his patience, for illnesses that taught him resilience. This wasn't toxic positivity, it was alchemy. By privately acknowledging how adversity served him, he transformed leaden experiences into golden wisdom. Contrast that with today's gratitude light, a surface level thanks for good coffee or sunny days, broadcast for social credit. The ancient version cuts deeper, thanking the rain for making roots grow where sunshine never could. Here's how to steal this practice. Tonight, skip the performative #gratitude post. Instead, grab any scrap of paper and write one sentence that follows this formula. I'm silently thankful for ordinary thing because unexpected lesson. Example, I'm silently thankful for my noisy neighbors because their laughter reminds me community exists even when I isolate. The magic isn't in the grandeur, it's in the excavation. Like an archaeologist brushing dust off pottery shards, you're uncovering meaning invisible to the casual observer. History's most resilient figures shared this habit. Albert Einstein kept a wonder journal filled with questions he was grateful to ponder. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote thank you letters she never sent, addressing them to people who'd hurt her but strengthened her character. Their gratitude wasn't decor, it was armor, because when you habitually notice invisible blessings, scarcity loses its fangs. The traffic jam becomes thinking time. The failed project reveals a skill gap to bridge. Even grief, when approached with silent thanks for what was rather than rage at what's lost, softens into something bearable. Try this for 7 nights, not as a self-improvement hack, but as a rebellion against a culture that monetizes every emotion. Watch what happens when thankfulness stops being content and becomes communion between you and the universe, no algorithm as middleman. You might discover what the Stoics knew: joy grows tallest when planted in quiet soil. Fear has a way of growing in the dark, left unnamed. It swells into monsters far larger than reality. The Stoics knew this intimately, which is why they practiced what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of assent, not ignoring terror, but dragging it into the silent light of reason. Picture a Roman soldier before battle, sitting alone with his wax tablet, etching out every possible disaster, his shield cracking, his formation breaking, the enemy's sword finding his throat. This wasn't morbid fixation, it was emotional inoculation. By writing down horrors in advance, they lost their power to shock. Seneca put it bluntly: we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Modern psychology confirms this ancient hack. A Harvard study had anxious patients spend 10 minutes daily writing their worst-case scenarios in detail. The result: their brains began processing fear as information rather than a tidal wave. Like a fire drill preparing you for real flames, the act of naming fears in silence rewires panic into preparedness. Think of a pilot reviewing emergency protocols before takeoff, not because disaster is likely, but because rehearsal turns chaos into procedure. Here's how to borrow this today. Grab any notebook, even your phone's notes app, and title it Premeditatio Malorum, Premeditation of Evils. Now, identify one gnawing anxiety, a looming job interview, a medical test, a difficult conversation. Write it as a headline worst-case scenario, then dissect it coldly. What exactly would happen? How would you respond? What resources remain? The magic isn't in predicting the future. It's in revealing that even the worst is survivable. Like a stagehand pulling back the curtain to show the machinery behind a terrifying puppet, silence exposes fear's strings. Consider the parallel in elite athlete training. Before the Olympics, gymnasts mentally rehearse falls alongside perfect routines. Why? Because visualizing a stumble, feeling the mat, hearing the crowd's gasp, robs the moment of its terror. When it actually happens, their nervous system recognizes it as familiar terrain. That's stoic silence at work, turning the unknown into the practiced. Try this tonight with a modern twist. Instead of doom scrolling before bed, open your notes and type, "If fear happens, I will." Keep it practical. If I bomb the presentation, I'll ask for feedback and practice more next time. If the biopsy is bad, I'll research specialists and lean on my sister. No platitudes, just concrete steps. You'll discover what the Stoics did. Most fears crumble under the weight of specificity, because here's the paradox they uncovered. The quieter you become with your fears, the less they scream. A soldier whose imagined captivity can endure it with dignity. A parent who's rehearsed losing their temper responds to a tantrum with steadier hands. Even in small terrors, a missed flight, a harsh critique, the act of writing them down in stillness shifts them from threats to puzzles. And puzzles, however difficult, are meant to be solved. Epictetus, the former slave turned philosopher, had no patience for pretenders. If you wish to be a writer, he scoffed, write. No fanfare, no audience, no performance, just the raw act itself. This cuts to the heart of Stoic authenticity, the radical notion that who you are matters infinitely more than who you appear to be. Imagine a world where people poured half the energy they spend crafting social media personas into actually becoming the people they pretend to be online. That's the Stoic challenge, not to delete your accounts, but to close the gap between your highlight reel and your daily life. Social media has turned authenticity into a performance. We curate vulnerability, stage spontaneity, and monetize our real selves until even honesty becomes a brand. The Stoics would have seen this coming. Epictetus warned, "It is impossible to be a philosopher and a celebrity at once, not because philosophy is obscure, but because truth withers under the spotlight." When every thought is shaped for engagement, every post calibrated for algorithms, we don't express ourselves. We fracture ourselves into marketable bits. Here's the twist: authenticity isn't about rejecting polish. Marcus Aurelius as emperor certainly dressed the part. The difference, his robes didn't dictate his character. That's the litmus test. Are you wearing the mask, or is the mask wearing you? Modern psychology reveals the toll of this divide. A Yale study found that people who frequently tailor their personalities to different audiences report higher exhaustion and lower life satisfaction. The Stoic antidote, what Epictetus called proherses, your core self, untouched by external validation. Try this today. Pick one arena where you're performing rather than being. Maybe it's laughing at a boss's joke that isn't funny, pretending enthusiasm for a trend you don't care about, or agonizing over a caption to seem effortlessly clever. For 24 hours, drop the act, not as a grand statement but as a quiet experiment. Order what you actually want at dinner, not what sounds impressive. Admit "I don't know" in a meeting instead of bluffing. Watch what happens. Likely, no one will even notice, but you'll feel the difference. That's the secret. Most people are too busy performing to audit your authenticity. History's most magnetic figures mastered this. Einstein famously wore the same sweater to avoid wasting brain power on trivialities. Michelle Obama's memoir reveals she stopped straightening her hair for public appearances once she realized the effort wasn't serving her. Their power came not from rebellion, but from ruthless editing, keeping only what aligned with their truth. The Stoic secret: authenticity isn't about broadcasting your quirks. It's about the silent work of aligning actions with values when no one's watching. That coworker who nods through meetings but never speaks her mind. The friend who censors his playlist when others enter the car. These are small betrayals of the self that accumulate like interest on a debt. The remedy isn't dramatic reinvention. It's moment-by-moment fidelity to what you genuinely think, feel, and believe. So here's your challenge today. Find one corner of your life where you've been playing a role. Then step out of character, not with a flourish, but with the quiet relief of someone taking off shoes that never fit. Because the ultimate freedom isn't going viral, it's no longer needing to. The year was 1665 when Cambridge University shuttered its doors, sending a young Isaac Newton home to quarantine as the plague ravaged England. Far from laboratories and libraries, with only his thoughts for company, Newton did something extraordinary. He turned silence into the crucible for genius. In those 18 months of forced solitude, he laid the foundations for calculus, unraveled the nature of light, and famously watched an apple fall in his family's orchard, sparking his theory of gravity. This wasn't mere productivity, it was Stoic otium in action, the disciplined use of solitude not as emptiness but as fertile ground. What's often overlooked is Newton's deliberate approach to isolation. Unlike our modern quarantines filled with streaming and scrolling, he structured his silence like a Stoic workshop. Mornings were for mathematics, afternoons for optics, evenings for correspondence, each segment guarded from distraction like a sacred ritual. Historians note he even boarded up his study window to avoid looking outside while working. This wasn't antisocial behavior, it was cognitive architecture. Newton understood what modern neuroscience confirms. breakthroughs don't come from constant stimulation, but from the uninterrupted space where thoughts can collide and recombine. Consider how creativity actually functions. The incubation phase, psychologists identify where insights emerge spontaneously after periods of detachment, isn't passive waiting. It's what happens when the mind, freed from immediate demands, begins connecting distant dots, like Newton's prism experiments revealing that white light hides a spectrum. Silence exposes hidden patterns in our own thinking. Composer John Cage composed his famous silent piece 433, not as a gimmick, but to prove that true listening begins when noise stops. The irony: today we've inverted this wisdom. Open-plan offices, buzzing group chats, and multitasking are celebrated as collaborative virtues, while solitude is treated like a productivity leak. Yet study after study reveals the opposite. Research from the University of California shows it takes an average of 23 minutes to regain deep focus after an interruption. Microsoft found that back-to-back video meetings reduce analytical thinking by 19%. We're drowning in connection yet starving for the very silence that fuels originality. Here's where the Stoic edge emerges. Newton didn't just endure quarantine, he weaponized it by asking better questions. While others obsessed over surviving the plague, he pondered why apples fall straight down instead of sideways. That shift from reacting to circumstances to probing fundamental truths is the hallmark of Stoic curiosity. Epictetus framed it as distinguishing between what's up to us and what isn't. The plague wasn't Newton's choice, but his focus was. So what project deserves your Newtonian quarantine? Not a year in lockdown, but perhaps a morning with notifications off, or a weekend retreat from habitual chatter. Try this experiment. Pick one creative challenge, a business pivot, a personal essay, a kitchen remodel, and give it the gift of undivided silence, not passive waiting, but active engagement without distraction. Track what emerges when you stop skimming the surface of your mind and dive into its depths. Because here's the truth Newton proved: the world's most transformative ideas weren't born in boardrooms or trend reports. They emerged in the quiet spaces between stimulus and response, where the Stoics, and now science, insist our real power lies. Your next breakthrough might not require an apple tree. Just the courage to stop long enough to notice what's always been falling right in front of you. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, didn't leave behind volumes of written wisdom like his successors. Instead, he lived by a principle that cut through the noise of ancient Athens. The cry of the heart is action. Picture him walking through the city's bustling agora, where philosophers debated endlessly under marble colonnades, while he quietly rebuilt lives after a shipwreck destroyed his merchant fortune. No grand speeches about virtue, just hands hauling stones to rebuild homes. That's the Stoic paradox. Silence isn't empty when it's filled with motion. Modern philanthropy offers a striking parallel. While some donors chase naming rights on hospital wings, others, like the anonymous billionaire who's paid off thousands of medical debts, operate in shadows. Their checks clear without press releases, their generosity measured in relieved voices rather than viral headlines. This isn't just humility, it's strategic restraint. Studies show anonymous giving often creates ripple effects. Recipients pay it forward at higher rates, untainted by the weight of owed gratitude. The Stoics would nod. When actions aren't diluted by the need for credit, their impact multiplies. Consider the difference between two co-workers. One constantly announces their ambitious goals in team meetings. The other arrives early to reorganize the shared drive without fanfare. Both might achieve similar results, but the latter builds something more valuable than productivity: trust. Research from the Harvard Business Review reveals that employees who consistently deliver without self-promotion are 30% more likely to be entrusted with leadership roles. Why? Because reliability speaks louder than rhetoric. Here's where it gets personal. Think of a recent moment when you explained rather than executed. Maybe you outlined your fitness plan to friends instead of lacing up your shoes, or debated the perfect time to launch a project instead of prototyping. Now imagine cutting that explanation in half and reinvesting that time in doing, not as a rejection of collaboration, but as a reclaiming of agency. The writer who stops tweeting about their manuscript and finally hits word count. The parent who models patience instead of lecturing about it. History's most enduring changes often arrived quietly. Rosa Parks didn't convene a press conference before refusing to give up her bus seat. She simply stayed put. The engineers who invented the Internet protocol didn't trademark it. They released it freely, catalyzing a revolution. These aren't exceptions, they're blueprints. When NASA Mission Control navigated the Apollo 13 crisis, their transcripts reveal no inspirational speeches, just terse, focused verbs: reroute power, recalculate trajectory. Survival hinged on verbs, not adjectives. So where could your life use less commentary and more concrete steps? Try this audit. For one day, track how many minutes you spend describing effort versus applying it. Then pick one arena, your side hustle, your parenting, your community, and impose a week-long action embargo. No announcing plans, just executing them. Notice how the weight shifts from performance to progress, because the ultimate test of Stoic silence isn't whether you can hold your tongue, it's whether your hands are too busy building to clap for themselves. We've traced the quiet power of Stoic silence from battlefields to boardrooms, from emperors' journals to modern neuroscience labs, uncovering a thread that binds them all. Stillness isn't emptiness, it's the forge where discipline, resilience, and focus are hammered into being. Think of Marcus Aurelius steadying Rome amid plague and war by first steadying his own mind before dawn. Or Epictetus, the enslaved philosopher who showed that freedom begins when we stop reacting to every provocation. These weren't men who avoided chaos, they mastered it by cultivating an inner citadel no external storm could breach. What makes Stoic silence so transformative isn't just the absence of noise, but the presence of something rarer: deliberate choice. Every time Seneca ignored petty insults to focus on writing, or Cato let political debates exhaust themselves before speaking, they were exercising what modern psychologists call response flexibility, the gap between stimulus and action where real power lies. Today, that might look like pausing before firing off an angry email, or turning off notifications to dive deep into work that matters. The scale changes, the mechanism doesn't. Consider how this plays out across history's greatest turnarounds. Admiral James Stockdale credited Stoic silence for surviving 7 years as a POW in Vietnam, noting that his captors could shackle his body but never his mind. Modern entrepreneurs like Tim Ferriss use morning journaling to replicate Marcus Aurelius' pre-dawn ritual, scripting challenges before they arrive. Even in parenting, when a toddler's meltdown meets a deep breath instead of a raised voice, that's Stoicism in action. The common thread: silence isn't passive surrender, it's active preparation. Here's your challenge this week: pick one arena to practice this ancient discipline. Maybe it's resisting the urge to complain about traffic, or sitting with a difficult emotion instead of numbing it with scrolling. Perhaps it's writing 3 sentences of honest self-reflection each night. No filter, no audience. Marcus Aurelius put it best: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Share your experiments below, not as performative wins, but as real struggles and insights. Because the quiet work of self-mastery isn't about perfection. It's about showing up again and again, in the space between what happens and how you choose to meet it. And that's how empires, outer and inner, are